Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new Pori Wrench stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Veteran Mechanic Taking Advantage of Active Duty Military and Retirees Messes with the Wrong Person and His Buddy Goes Down with Him. This happened back in 2002 on Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. I was stationed down the way at 32nd Street Naval Base for my Military Occupation Specialty School and was a new Lance Corporal E3 at the time. I had a 1994 Dodge Spirit with 180k miles or so and I'd just driven it across the country. I bought it a few days before leaving KS at an auto auction. A couple weeks into my school it died, at the gate, next to the sentry. After an initial freak out and the subsequent search of me and my car, everyone calms down and they help push my car to the top of the hill so I can coast down the other side and into the auto repair shop parking lot, which thankfully went without incident. Before I go in I call my dad and then his cousin. My dad knows a ton about cars and his cousin is a mechanic with his own very successful shop, like a dozen work bays, and they handle everything from regular cars to farm equipment to semis. I know a fair bit about cars on my own, but he knows everything. Between us we decide it looks like the distributor or the distributor cap is the issue. My dad's cousin says it's a common issue on spirits from this time and recommends I get it fixed here by a real mechanic. Now at this point it's important to note his shop did a very thorough once-over for me after I bought the car and gave me good notes on the condition of the car in writing, from his shop. I go in and talk to the guy at the counter. They're not too busy and pull it into a bay and run their diagnostics, same thing. Distributor cap. Cool. I get the services agreement saying they'll replace it and call me if they find anything else. I hear nothing until the end of the week when they call and say my car is ready. When I get there they present me with a bill for like $1,400. Wow. Just wow. Now my heart has stopped beating and I say something about that being a lot for a distributor cap. The guy who owns the place, I find out he's a veteran from way back, breaks off talking to a Master Sergeant MSgt E8 and comes over to talk to me. He starts telling me about how it was much worse than they originally thought and they ended up having to replace my radiator, plus hoses, and my timing belt and a head gasket. I'm still in shock and say something like the head gasket was fine 2 weeks ago and so was the radiator and the timing. He puts his hand on my shoulder and tells me I don't know what I'm talking about because they've been waiting to fail for a long time now. I'm confused now and say that's not possible. I bought it 2 weeks ago and... He cuts me off and says I was sold a complete lemon and I should have had it checked. He says he felt bad for me and this should have cost over $2,000, but he cut me a deal and he can work with me in an installment plan but will have to charge me interest. Now I'm suspicious and starting to get upset and I say the only repair I authorized was a distributor cap and they should have called me before doing anything else, and I start to explain I've got paperwork from the inspection I had done that said those other things were fine. I'm going to get it from the car and the MSGT grabs me by the arm and starts telling me I'm being ungrateful and disrespectful to a respected mechanic and business owner and asks me if I'm implying he's cheating me. Every time I try to open my mouth he cuts me off and keeps telling the owner not to worry, he'll make sure this young pup pays what is owed. He's threatening to take me over to admin and have my pay docked. Now I'm angry and a bit scared. Another Marine intervenes and says that's a little extreme and to let me say my piece. I get permission to get into my car to get my maintenance history, which includes an oil change, the inspection documentation and the original quote for the distributor cap work. At this point there's a crowd of customers and some other passers-by. The owner of the garage and MSGT are in full theater mode talking about how I'm not appreciating the huge help they've been and I'm trying to get out of paying for work I asked for. Now I'm mostly just upset. I come in and the MSGT cuts me off and tells me to be careful how I talk to his friend. I ask the MSGT if he's going to let me speak or keep interrupting me while I'm in a private conversation with a business owner. I ask him if he owns part of the shop, no, and ask why he's so interested in not hearing a Marine out. Then I get out the original statement of services and say the distributor cap is all I agreed to. I also ask why he didn't call me and he says he called my barracks several times and left messages including ones telling me the car was undrivable until the repairs were made. So he went with the lowest cost option to get me back on the road. Oops. I say, that's interesting, the only number I gave you is my cell phone and I don't have any messages or even attempted calls until the previous evening when they left a message that my car was ready. I show everyone my call history, including a captain who's very interested and standing quietly by. The MSGT has backed off and the captain is quietly talking to him off on the side. Now the owner is backpedaling a bit and saying he was thinking of a different customer but he's already made the replacement and has to charge me for the work. Then I pull out the stuff from the inspection and it has some fun little statements in it. Statements like, timing belt good, timing good. Check again in 30k miles. Radiator, appears to be recently replaced. All hoses new in last 6 months. Nothing on the head gasket but there's a statement that there are no leaks in that area which was why he said he had to replace it. I say he can put all of my original stuff back on because all I'm paying for is the distributor cap work. He gets red-faced and starts demanding I pay for the labor and he can't put things back on because they were too badly damaged in the removal process. Now some old retired guy chimes in from the back and asks what kind of mechanic damages things when they take them apart? The owner drags out my radiator and there is a giant hole in one side that looks like it was stabbed with a crowbar. Now a couple other people, locals, are questioning past situations where he helped them out with repairs they didn't know they needed. The MSGT tried to walk off and a colonel and a sergeant major in civilian attire post him to the side for a later conversation. The captain pulls me aside and asks to see the info I have and to see my phone again and steps behind the counter to photocopy it all. He has a truly evil grin. Turns out he's a prior enlisted former infantry marine who became an officer after going back to college. He has suspected this shop of being crooked for a while but never had enough proof. He's on the commanding general's staff and they were looking into complaints from permanent personnel and retirees in the area. The owner is sweating bullets now. I only pay for the distributor cap and get a statement that says my balance is 0 so he doesn't try anything in the future. The captain takes me to dinner and gets my info and basically a statement from me of what happened. After dinner he takes me back to his office while he types up something for me to sign about the whole incident and I call Verizon to get them to fax over the incoming, outgoing calls from my number from the past week. He explains that the MSGT has been steering a lot of customers to his buddy and they suspect he's getting kickbacks. The captain and several others have been taking their cars there for months to try to catch the guy doing what he did to me. The MSGT sealed his fate when he started threatening to take my pay. They suspected he was getting kickbacks or favors in exchange for hooking up his buddy. Now he has the justification he needs to formally look into the MSGT. The captain was thrilled and bought me a 6-pack for using up so much of my Friday evening. I wasn't around long enough to see the outcome but when I left there were auditors from base services going through the business with a fine-tooth comb and it was a legal matter. Once something like that gets started it probably means a business and the owners will get kicked out of the on-base location. The base owns the building and the owner leases it. He and his business would also end up blacklisted as a place known for taking advantage of service members. Most commands give this out to people who check in so no one patronizes them. It still boggles my mind that one veteran would try to use that status to take advantage of others. Or that a senior Marine would do that to other Marines. I know there are people out there like that but having the shared common background we do, I expect better. The next one is titled, Make Me Wait for My Money. I'll take the engine back. My grandfather had been retired for a bit after getting hurt on his job at the railroad, actually got crushed between 2 boxcars. Being a little bored at the time he offered a local indie VW shop owner his time to run for parts and other errands in exchange for some help on his VW Squareback. Carbs he could have handled but this was some German fuel injection voodoo and not quite his thing. So one day my grandfather returns to the shop in the afternoon to find Jay the owner of the shop rummaging around and acting pretty pissed off and he asked him what was up. The story went that Jay had just rebuilt and installed an engine for a customer and the guy picked up the car that morning and had paid with a check. While Jay liked cash better, being circa 1980 this wasn't uncommon. When Jay went to cash the check at lunch the bank informed him that payment on the check had been stopped. He asked them when, as he had just received it a few hours ago. They told him just this morning. So apparently the owner of the car paid the bill and went to the bank and immediately cancelled the check to stop the payment in his freshly repaired car. Jay called the guy on the phone and asked him what the hell happened, why was the check cancelled? The guy said, "You made me wait for my car, so I'm going to make you wait for your money." What had happened was one of the parts for the engine had been delayed a few days and Jay couldn't finish the job when initially promised. But as soon as the part came in, he put the engine back together and got the guy his car back. Needless to say, Jay was upset. It's Friday and he wanted to wrap things up a little early, and getting paid for an engine rebuild was a nice wrap up to the week. Now the revenge. Jay asked my grandfather to come with him. He grabbed a few tools and he hopped in his little pickup, a VW of course, and off they went. They drive over to the guy's house, knowing where he lived based on him being a customer and having the address on the cancelled check. Pulled up to the guy's house and proceeded to remove the engine from the car in about 10 minutes. While this might seem unbelievable if you ever worked on an old air-cooled VW, they are literally held in by 4 bolts, a couple of screws and a few wires, and a good mechanic could have one out in no time at all, and Jay had been at this for years. After it was removed, my grandfather helped him put the engine in the back of the truck. While a little bulky, a complete VW engine is not that heavy and 2 people can easily lift it. Now the pro revenge. After they had the motor loaded up, Jay wrote a note and left it under the wiper. When you decide to pay me, just add in an extra $1 to pay for the removal and replacement of the engine and for the time it took me to come over here and get it, butthole, and they drove off. A few hours later the guy called Jay back and was livid when his new engine wouldn't start. It may not have been obvious, but should have been, when he walked to the car and it wasn't sitting right. They sit a little high without the extra weight. He was promptly reamed by Jay about the whole thing and told if he wanted the engine back he needed to pay the extra time and labor, and most likely in cash. I am making an assumption on how the actual events unfolded, as it was almost 40 years ago, but Jay could be an idiot as well. The next one is titled, "Grandpa Wants to Threaten Me for Money? I'll Take You to Jail Myself." This occurred several years ago. My grandfather is one of those Machiavellian types who could care less who he rips off. He's spent the majority of his adult life in prison, including from the time I was 6 years old until I was 18. Essentially, he can't manage to stay clean from any drug he can get his hands on, and it leads to him committing robberies. The lengthy stay during my childhood was for robbing a bank. After release, he is constantly stealing from his very elderly mother and doing every underhanded thing he can think of to avoid having to actually work. So after I graduate, I begin to work in the corrections field. After a couple years in prisons, I managed to land a great job with a county home confinement office. This was great until my grandpa, in a drug withdrawal-induced lack of reason, decided to rob a pharmacy and is placed on home confinement as a condition of his bond. I lived in another county than he did, but he managed to come to the city I live in to commit the crime, thus forcing him to find residence in my town to serve his home confinement. So, he gets placed on home confinement, and I explain to my supervisor, who I have a great relationship with, the situation. My supervisor doesn't really worry about it because he understands I have no real relationship with him and I'm not going to treat him any different than anybody else on our caseload. Everything goes fine for a couple weeks until my grandpa starts texting me when he knows I am on call to try to get out of the house. I tell him that I can't let him do that and he begrudgingly accepts that. Over time he is constantly trying to get favors, more and more, family members asking me to deliver him money and groceries because I live in the same town, etc. Eventually, he gets hard up for money because his family source has cut him off, and starts asking me. I tell him I can't do that, and even if I could I didn't have the money to give. He isn't having that, so he decides to threaten to leave home and come to my house and tell my supervisor I gave him permission. Obviously, if he did this it would show on GPS that he was at my house and that would look bad no matter what the circumstances. I decide to call his bluff, and because of the escalation I figured it was time to handle the situation before he takes it any further. The next morning, I tell my supervisor he should call him in for a random drug screen. This happens, and to no surprise, he hits positive. This puts him in violation of his terms of release and I have the honors of putting him in handcuffs and driving him to jail myself. Upon his court date, because I was the one who charged him with violating home confinement, I got to go to his court hearing to find out if they would reinstate him. The judge asked if the home confinement office is okay with taking him back. Our local judges always ask us this on violations. I told him no, so my grandpa had to spend the next 8 months in jail. The last one is titled, "Threaten Me into Not Reporting an Incident to the Police After Rejecting You. Prepare to Lose Your Job." When I was 19, I worked in a one-man store in my local area. Sure, there were a lot of entitled people that came in, but there was also absolutely lovely regulars that I bonded with. Unfortunately, what happened didn't involve one of the nice regulars but a creepy older man. The man was probably in his 40s, dirty and just an outright creep. The shop didn't have any panic buttons, so when he came in I was on my own. He was a pervert who would just come in to harass me. He would lean over the counter to stroke my arms, make disgusting derogatory comments towards me and try to fill me up any time I left the counter. I hated working there because of this guy. I reported him to the manager multiple times but nothing was ever done. I even showed him the CCTV but again, nothing would happen. One day, the man came in saying to me extremely sexual things and tried to grab my breasts. I just snapped. I shoved him away from me, telling him to get out of the store and that if he didn't stop I would report him to the police. The guy laughed at me and said there was nothing I could do until I pointed at the cameras. This enraged the guy and he told me how he knew I lived in the area, so if he finds me I would end up in a hospital because the things he would do. He left but I was absolutely terrified. I knew this guy was ex-military and he could easily overpower me. After this, he came in the store displaying what looked like weapons and followed me when I visited local stores. On a shift swap, I nervously came into my work as the manager was cashing his till. He saw me and asked what was wrong and I told him what was happening. I said how I need to report this guy to the police but needed evidence, so I mentioned the CCTV. My manager responded, "I'm so sorry but I'm afraid you can't do that. If you do then they will do a background check on you and I will have to tell them everything I know about you." This terrified me even more. The manager was a friend of mine and the reason I got the job to begin with. He knew that I had home problems, so he was basically telling me that he would tell the police about it and rip my family apart. He added, "See, I value you as a friend, but after seeing your true colors when you refused to go out with me kind of tells me to be honest to the police. Do you really want to involve them?" It became evident that the reason he never handled my complaints before is because I rejected him. He asked me out a few times which I rejected but didn't think much of it. Sadly, this got to me and I never reported what happened. As scared as I was, I didn't want my family to be destroyed and wasn't going to go out with him just to get the evidence I needed. Instead, I started to plot my revenge against the manager. The area manager and my manager were good friends. He let him off with everything during inspections, but rumor had it that the area manager was moving to a different location, meaning that a new one would come in and do an inspection. Knowing this, I patiently waited to see if this was true. One day, I went in and saw a man I had never seen before. It was the new area manager and he was in doing an inspection while the manager wasn't there. Turned out he met the manager before and did not like him one bit, so he was trying to find something to fire him. He told me that he wanted to monitor the things I would do day to day in the shop, and so I did, badly. I made sure to duck up every chance I got, not scanning items, not checking everyone's IDs, stocking things wrong, etc. The area manager was horrified and asked me if I was ever trained. I told him the truth, I wasn't, but he brought up my file saying I signed to say I did receive training. Luckily, my dad always encouraged me to keep a log of everything I do at work, so I gave him the week I started and the day I signed it, telling him that he just got me to sign it and he could check the cameras. Which of course he did. As a result, he sat me down and asked me what other things my manager did that he wasn't aware of. I told him everything, that he make me and my coworker take over his shifts to leave early, how he never fulfilled requests for holidays and took them away last minute, and more, including how he never processed official complaints and would persuade us not to report incidents. He asked what kind of incidents, and I told him about the customer and how he threatened me not to report it to the police, saying how the only way he was going to help me was if I dated him. The area manager was disgusted and asked if I had all the relevant dates to prove what I was saying. I handed him my logbook and said that I felt awful telling him all this as I didn't want anyone to get into trouble. That was a lie, of course I wanted results. The area manager reassured me that nothing was going to happen to me as this was all on the manager. I didn't hear much of it until eventually my manager never came into work and a new guy was there. I asked where the manager was and was told he got fired. Turned out he had a hearing that he thought was just about how he managed the store when it was actually a lot more serious than that. He wasn't just pulled up on what happened with me, but it was revealed he was falsifying paperwork and falsifying his hours. He was stealing money from the store. So he was subsequently fired for falsifying documents, mistreating staff, abusing his power and stealing, the latter he was getting taken to court for. The area manager used everything I said against him. I quit a little after this but have a great relationship with the new manager. He is a kind, professional man. I also moved and never saw the customer again. I checked social media and my old manager had blocked me on everything. I haven't heard from him personally since but heard that he claims I am lying and that I was a spiteful witch. At least he wasn't entirely wrong. I am a spiteful witch. Thanks for listening.